Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and we hit 3,000 subscribers just the other day. I think that Monstercat Top 10 video was really the video I needed to get that final push into 3K. I'm very excited about it. I just wanted to take this this brief moment before I get into this Calvin Harris review to thank you guys for the endless support. Never saw my channel really getting to these stages. I remember getting excited about 100 subscribers and 1,000 subscribers, and now we're at 3K, and hopefully it'll keep snowballing from there, because I'm very passionate about this and I love what I do, and I hope I can keep doing it for years to come. I am planning on doing some kind of live stream event either this Friday or next Monday to celebrate. Basically, it would just be a lot of talking to you guys, kind of getting to know my audience. I'll probably be taking suggestions for what I should be listening to while the live stream is going on. And I'm going to have a couple giveaways too, along with announcing some very important information. So this is an event you guys do not want to miss. Stay tuned. And without further ado, let's get into my review of the 5th studio album from Calvin Harris. This one is called Funk Wave Bounces Volume 1. Out of all the artists that I've reviewed on my channel, Calvin Harris is probably the one that least needs an introduction. He's literally the richest DJ in the world and one of the best known ones. I also didn't really have a super unique or early introduction to Calvin Harris. I found out about him through his song We Found Love with Rihanna that was in 2011. Although I have personally enjoyed my fair share of the pre-pop Calvin Harris music, like Acceptable in the 80s from the I Created Disco album. But I will admit that the majority of my enjoyment for Calvin Harris comes in the form of his 18 Months album, which was the first album I ever listened to by Calvin Harris. I will say though that his 2014 follow-up Motion was very messy and lacked the same cohesion that 18 Months had, with Wiles kind of awkwardly hopping back and forth between his more dance poppy sound and like straight EDM festival bangers. He had a number of collaborations with different producers that in my opinion didn't really bring anything super unique to the table, even featuring some of my favorite names in kind of the big room house scene like Firebeats and Rehab. And that's definitely not to say there wasn't good music on that album. I was just personally very underwhelmed by it, especially because so much of that album just followed the very basic EDM formula of 2013 and 2014, so that record didn't really stand out a ton in that particular year, and I kind of had the same fear going into whatever his next album was going to be, with him following the basic deep house formula and How Deep Is Your Love, kind of following the more tropical house kind of sound that's been getting big on My Way and This Is What You Came For. But then surprisingly, Calvin Harris took a very strange 180-degree turn with the single Slide featuring Frank Ocean and Migos, and then apparently from there, Calvin Harris just went full funk. Simply said, Calvin Harris had the world in a buzz when he dropped the trailer for this album, featuring 20 different well-known names from the pop music scene. I could even go as far as to say that this was probably the most anticipated album of 2017, at least in the EDM world. But I wouldn't call this album EDM at all, because Calvin Harris gives us exactly what you'd expect given the title. This is straight funk music. Whether I like it or not, general dance music fans, and for that matter Calvin Harris fans worldwide, are probably going to be moderately disappointed in this album just because it's such a departure from any level of uniqueness that Calvin Harris had as a producer. Really, there is very little trace of the EDM Calvin Harris on this album, other than the fact that there are some disco elements on this that do date back to his early days, as well as on the song Prayers Up. I thought there were a couple little sounds that reminded me of some of the songs on Motion, but that's really it. That's the only kind of parallels I could draw between this work and anything else he's made in the past. Funk music hasn't been big in the mainstream in a very long time, and at least for me, it's very refreshing to see some of the biggest names in modern pop music kind of colliding with that sound, and in my opinion, very naturally. With the R&B names like Frank Ocean, Pharrell Williams, John Legend, Khalid, these kind of connections are a little bit less surprising. The more surprising thing to me was kind of seeing these mumble rappers all over this project really working well with this general style of production and instrumentation. Notably the Migos, Young Thug, Future, and Lil Yachty. With those names generally leaning more toward trap music, I was very surprised to see their vocal styles work very naturally in these songs. I wouldn't say that those particular features, maybe with the exception of Lil Yachty and Migos, were really among my favorites on this album. In fact, I'd prefer the performances from Frank Ocean, Ariana Grande, Khalid, Snoop Dogg, and Kehlani just about any day over those features. But they're not bad, and that's the thing. When you're a producer of Calvin Harris's stature and you put together an absolutely monstrous guest list for your album, the stakes are going to be set high, and I think for the most part, Calvin Harris hit everything he possibly could. And this time he didn't have to do it with a bunch of fancy co-production features. In fact, this entire album is produced by Calvin Harris all the way through. I originally thought that A-Track would have had some kind of production feature considering he's an EDM producer himself, but A-Track's feature is actually just him doing a DJ scratch, and that's actually what I favor the most from A-Track, so I was very happy to see that that was his addition to this album. And of course, I wouldn't say that Funk Wave Bounces Volume 1 is like the most creative or most game-changing funk album in history, because it's definitely not. It's just Calvin Harris kind of going back into his roots and doing it in a very successful way, in my opinion. When I went into this thing, I was kind of expecting we were just going to get a bunch of clones of Slide over and over again, and Calvin Harris didn't do that. He manages to spin each track in its own unique way, and he makes it work with his vocal guests for the most part. In fact, the only appearance that I really hated on this album was probably Skirt on Me featuring Nicki Minaj, and that's probably just because generally I don't really love Nicki Minaj's style. I mean, I've never really had to cover her on this channel before, but I just don't really love her lyricism and her persona. A cool thing though about almost every track on this LP, with the exception of Skirt on Me, is that Calvin Harris is kind of able to work with those vocalists about kind of taking their general style and switching it to be able to flow very naturally in with this funk sound. I was especially surprised with the Katy Perry feature and the Ariana Grande feature. Neither of them really sounded like themselves, which I was impressed with, to say the least. Now, I don't mean really to compare Calvin Harris to Daft Punk, because I feel like that duo is on another level entirely when it comes to innovation, but I feel like Funk Wave Bounces Volume 1 is like Calvin Harris's Random Access Memories. He's just taking a step back from really his old style and the progression he was going with that, and kind of looking back at his roots and really pulling it together very successfully. And I mean, you could compare the two albums, considering Pharrell Williams is a key part in both of them, but I'm not going to do that. My biggest problem with Calvin Harris in the context of Funk Wave Bounces Volume 1 is exactly that. Volume 1. This album can and very well should be a one-and-done deal. Funk Wave Bounces Volume 1 is special because it's so different from the rest of Calvin Harris's discography, and if we're getting a Volume 2 or Volume 3 of this album, then that luster is going to completely diminish. And technically, we're not confirmed to be getting a Volume 2 of this album, but just given the title, it can kind of be assumed. If he does do it though, my hope is just that he'd be able to spin funk in an entirely new direction, because I don't think I could take this exact album a second time, no matter how much I like it. And yeah, that's about it. I'm personally a big fan of this album, and I would definitely suggest you go check this thing out for yourself. If I had to give it a rating, I'm probably gonna go with a strong 7 out of 10. And as always, I have the Spotify link down in the description, so you guys can go check this out. And if you have listened to it, which I hope most of you have by this point, let me know what you think about it down in the comment section below. Stay tuned for news about the live stream. It's either coming this Friday or Monday. I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll catch you later. Peace.